Alright, economics videos. Yay! Something different for a change. Alright, Modern Mystic made a video sort of just kind of talking about the debt problem and the fact that debt, investment as he calls it, sort of runs the economy. This idea of pushing, I guess you would say, the wagon, the movement, creating the momentum that is the economy, and that the real dangers are when momentum stops and then it just starts to feed on itself. So sort of in a way you could look at economies as like flywheels, that they gain tremendous momentum, both going in both directions. So when they tend to slow down, it takes a lot of energy to get them back going again, especially when they go stop full dead. You're really hard pressed to get it moving again. And something like that anyway. He didn't use that metaphor. Didn't even say anything like that really, but I'm just going to paraphrase it that way. So anyway, the thing is when does it become unsustainable? When you're using a mechanism like debt as the pusher, what do you have to do how do you ever wind it down? So it's sort of like the national debt. You could look at that borrowing and you could say, well, how do you ever pay it back? How do you ever become prosperous enough where you can start to pay back that money? And is your prosperity, it's going to totally slow down the momentum of the flywheel. So you have to put terrible drag on your economy. It's like putting the brakes on. And who wants to put the brakes on? Everybody wants to coast, or they want to accelerate. But nobody wants to decelerate in the race. Because that's no fun. So that's the real problem here. Is that is there a sustainable way to do this thing without having this, to gain you're going to have the pain? Is it inevitable? Is there no way around that? And I guess I would argue that certainly there are ways around it. There's the growth our prosperity should be made out of real technical enhancements, the efficiencies of mass production, computers, automation, robotics. These are things that we all should be benefiting from. And unfortunately, the only people benefiting are the people getting richer. The rich get richer, their ownership stake gets higher and higher, and that means the rent we have to pay to them gets higher and higher. And that's the real drag here, is that whatever prosperity we throw into this current economic system, heavily laden in debt, there's a huge rent for every bit of stimulus you put into the economy. So say if the government spends $2 trillion in deficit spending, in debt money, the problem is that most of that money will get sucked up by the rich, buying more rich man tickets, buying more ownership IOUs, and that those all have to have rent paid on them. They all have to have interest paid on them, it doesn't really feed the momentum of the engine. It turns into just wasted consumption, unproductive consumption. It doesn't build us interstate highways or electric grids or all the other publicly used infrastructure that makes our lives better. It gets wasted on silly labor like birthday parties and marble mansions and all that kind of nonsense that most people won't ever see any value in. It'll be all just wasted labor. And that's what most labor now is, probably pretty much most of it, seems to be tied up feeding the profit margins of the rich. And so all the value of labor is being consumed by their claims to a piece of the pie, a big piece of the pie. A big piece of the productivity pie goes in their pocket. So the working man has gotten poorer, the rich man's gotten richer, and it's just sort of just unsustainable as it is. This trend can't go anywhere. It's sort of the Marxist failure of capitalism. You can't find, I mean, there's a point where labor makes so little gain that it can't even feed its work. It's not getting enough money to buy enough food to be able to sustain itself to do actual labor. And we're sort of migrating towards that point, that labor has gotten so cheap and the owners have gotten so greedy. And so the expectation of their profit, so let's just say when you start winding this down, you've spent really big on the credit card, you've lived really high, and now you have to pay it back. Now, the truth is, we could just tear up the credit card bill and no one's going to get hurt except for the mega rich. But we won't do that because that would be too rational, and humans can't be rational. So instead, we're going to try to pay this money back. And paying the money back means that work gets devalued, and that workers make less and less money. They can do less and less consuming, which means they'll need to do less and less producing, which means there'll be less and less demand for their labor, which means they'll get less and less wages, and that cycle will feed on itself. And we'll have the work for a day for a hamburger kind of scenario. The depression will show up, and it will be nasty. But it's the only way to get rid of the debt. It's the only way to bankrupt everyone. Bankrupt everyone and start over. So instead of only bankrupting the mega rich, the top richest 1%, we're going to bankrupt everyone and bankrupt civilization and drive it over a cliff. Because there is no way to pay back the debt without substantially turning off investment. You have to substantially turn off the engine that's spinning the wheel. And the wheel is just going to start moving slower and slower. It's going to get heavier and heavier. And there's just no hope in that scenario. Paying back the debt means destruction of millions, billions of lives even, because it means you have to basically unemploy everybody. And that ain't going to work at all. I mean, but the problem, really, the real problem with debt is the debt holders. The debt holders expect to make a profit on the debt they hold, and that interest can't be paid. And so, either they have to, take a loss on the debt, not expect an interest, not expect gain, or it's going to fail anyway, and they're going to be out of luck altogether. Because there is no practical way to pay it back. There just really isn't. In a market where labor has so little value. It just takes too many years of work to be able to earn enough money to pay back how much money is owed. The current dollars aren't worth what the past dollars borrowed were worth, in a sense. Even though there's been inflation and a devaluation of the currency, in terms of the work value, the productivity value, the current worker can't achieve the same kind of value because he doesn't demand the same kind of salary relative to the value of the dollar. So his work is worth a third of what it used to be worth, So he borrowed money in an atmosphere of high yield work, and he's got to pay it back in an atmosphere of low yield work. So essentially, the working time he borrowed, I mean, that's basically what borrowing is. It's borrowing on work. Labor you don't do today, but promise to do tomorrow, kind of a thing. But unfortunately, they borrowed dollars payment in a salary of the past that had more substance than the salary they can earn now. So they can't pay back that debt with, what they got, the 2 weeks vacation they got for borrowing, let's call it, has to be paid back in 6 weeks of work now. So that's part of the fail of the circumstance, and part of the stupidity that borrowing represents. It's always a lose proposition when a working man borrows, when a productive person borrows, because the borrowing always goes to people who don't earn the profit they steal off the borrow. It's just that simple. It's making money. Making money on surplus is essentially a crime. It's a crime against workers, especially when that surplus is possessed without the value of work, or productivity, or innovation, but merely exists as a claim of ownership in perpetuity. So that's what we basically endorsed, is perpetual king tickets. Some people are born kings and guaranteed an income for not working. And anybody reasonable could probably understand how that's not going to work. If you had a 10-seated bicycle you were riding, and you start letting some people ride without pedaling, it's not going to be too long before, as soon as you get to like 50% of people pedaling and 50% not pedaling, the 50% pedaling are going to die. It's going to be too much to drag, too much dead wood they're going to be carrying, and the rich are preposterous dead wood. Again, they waste your labor in preposterous volumes. They spill your blood, and it's just it's tragic how people have been duped into accepting this monarchy that we exist in. And that's what it is, though. Economically, we exist in monarchy. There's no other way to look at it. It's birthright ownership, birthright income. Work has nothing to do with it. It's pretty much the story. Productivity has nothing to do with it. Honor, integrity has nothing to do with it. And the only good news is it's going to fail catastrophically, and some of those rich people will taste their own blood for a change. So, yeah, they sure do deserve it. Anyway, till next time. Really, not a bad day, but I got this stupid head-ear problem still. And it's making me less than stable. Anyway, till next time.